Have you ever truly glimpsed what lies beneath the glittering veneer of immense wealth? Beyond the monolithic skyscrapers bearing a single, powerful name, past the velvet ropes and hushed veneration, does happiness truly reside? Or does unimaginable fortune merely construct higher walls, fashioning a more luxurious, yet ultimately isolating, gilded cage? Tonight, we plunge into a narrative that dissects this very question. This is the saga of Damian Sterling, a man whose ambition sculpted the city's skyline, whose name was shorthand for power and unfathomable riches, yet whose heart echoed with a silence as vast and profound as his empire. He believed he controlled every variable, mitigated every risk, planned every outcome with meticulous precision. But life, in its breathtaking and terrifying unpredictability, rarely bows to a blueprint. Sometimes, the most seismic shifts, the moments that utterly redefine existence, don't announce themselves with a thunderous fanfare. Sometimes, they arrive softly, unexpectedly, bathed in the stark, relentless fluorescent glare of a place designed for the utterly mundane. Prepare yourself for a journey into the nexus of buried secrets and unexpected second chances, where a chance collision in a grocery store aisle ignites the unraveling of a past deliberately concealed, forcing the city's richest man to confront the one thing his fortune could never command: the unvarnished truth. What happens when the life you so painstakingly constructed is irrevocably shattered by too small word from a child you never knew existed? Now let's begin this emotional story. The city was Damian Sterling's kingdom, a sprawling, dynamic tapestry of concrete, glass, and unyielding ambition woven through with the very threads of his influence. From the 68th floor of the gleaming Sterling Tower, the metropolis unfurled below him, a breathtaking panorama of lights, motion, and ceaseless energy that typically filled him with a fierce, almost primal sense of possessive pride. He hadn't just built an empire, Sterling Corp. He had conquered this concrete jungle, bending it to his will, reshaping industries with ruthless efficiency, visionary foresight, and an almost predatory drive. His name wasn't just a label. It was a byword, whispered in boardrooms with awe, splashed across financial headlines, and etched indelibly onto the very fabric of modern commerce. He commanded wealth that defied easy comprehension, power that could move markets with a whisper and shape policy with a nod, and an existence curated to eliminate friction, inconvenience, and any unwelcome hint of the ordinary. Yet, on this particular late afternoon, staring out at the empire he had forged and ruled with an iron will, Damian felt adrift. A profound, unsettling stillness had settled over him, a quiet void that wealth couldn't fill and success couldn't silence. The relentless, burning drive that had propelled him from a scholarship kid with nothing but a ferocious intellect and a burning need to prove himself to this dizzying pinnacle of power felt muted. The once intoxicating thrill of the next acquisition, the next billion, strangely inadequate. It was an emptiness that gnawed persistently at the edges of his meticulously controlled world, a void shaped suspiciously like regret, a silent accusation in the heart of his gilded cage. His personal chef, a culinary artist of international repute, had prepared a meticulously balanced, exquisitely presented meal. His armored car, an ever-present driver, were waiting downstairs, a symbol of his carefully maintained security bubble. His evening schedule, typically a tightly packed mosaic of calls and reports demanding his undivided attention, was set. But an uncharacteristic restlessness prickled beneath his skin, a subtle current of discontent. It coalesced into a peculiar, almost forgotten craving. Ghirardelli Intense Dark Chocolate, specifically the 72% cacao Twilight Delight Squares. Not the rarefied, imported varieties his staff usually stocked, the kind found in obscure boutiques, but this specific mainstream brand he hadn't tasted, hadn't thought about in years. He remembered sharing it with her, Elena, on a windswept beach on the coast of Maine, long before Sterling Corp was the behemoth it had become, back when their dreams were simpler, intertwined like the patterns on the waves. The memory surfaced, sharp and bittersweet, catching him off guard like a sudden undertow. Elena Reyes, the woman who had seen the vulnerable man behind the impenetrable armor of his ambition, the one who had loved him fiercely, challenged him fearlessly, and made him feel alive in a way no business deal ever could. The woman he had ruthlessly, clinically cut out of his life 5 years ago, convincing himself with chilling certainty that it was a necessary sacrifice on the altar of his destiny, a pragmatic amputation for the sake of his grand design. Impulse, a commodity Damien Sterling rarely indulged in, a wild card he usually avoided, seized him with unexpected force. His personal shopper, the ever-efficient and utterly reliable Ms. Albright, was unexpectedly ill. He could have sent any number of equally competent assistants, dispatching them with a curt instruction, but the thought felt sterile, hollow. Suddenly, unaccountably, he wanted the tactile reality of the search, the brief, almost absurd anonymity, the bizarre normalcy of it all. "Cancel my calls for the next 2 hours, Robert." He instructed his head of security through the intercom, the decision made, solidified, before logic or caution could intervene. "I'm stepping out. Alone." The silence on the other end spoke volumes about the sheer irregularity of the request, the deviation from established protocol, but Robert simply replied, "Understood, Mr. Sterling." Perimeter protocols engaged. Minutes later, stripped of his usual retinue and the buffer of his meticulously controlled environment, Damien found himself inside the market hall, an upscale grocery store catering to the city's affluent, yet still retaining a semblance of everyday, bustling life. It was brighter, louder, more intensely peopled than he remembered public spaces being, a sensory overload after the hushed quiet of his tower. The air hummed with the rhythmic beeps of checkout scanners, the murmur of 100 separate conversations, the rattle and squeak of shopping carts, the faint, warring sense of baked bread and clinical disinfectant. He wore a charcoal, gray Brunello Cucinelli sweater, tailored jeans that fit like a second skin, and discreetly expensive leather sneakers. His attempt at blending in, at adopting the camouflage of the common man. Yet he felt conspicuously out of place, an apex predator suddenly released into a petting zoo, every nerve ending screaming at the unfamiliarity. He secured a shopping cart, sleeker, heavier, more technologically advanced than he recalled, equipped with a tablet display, and steered it with an unpracticed stiffness towards the confectionery aisle, the specific craving for dark chocolate a peculiar, grounding anchor in this bewildering sea of the ordinary. He scanned the shelves, the sheer, overwhelming variety of choices momentarily paralyzing him. He finally located the chocolate aisle, a vibrant wall of colorful wrappers promising various degrees of sugary or bitter bliss. His eyes, trained to spot opportunities and anomalies, searched for the familiar dark blue packaging. And then, time fractured. He saw her, standing just a few feet away, bathed in the harsh, unflattering fluorescent light of the aisle, was Elena Reyes. She was reaching for a box of organic crackers on a high shelf, standing on her tiptoes, her dark ponytail swinging slightly with the effort. 5 years had passed, etching subtle, unbidden changes onto her face, changes he hadn't been present to witness. There were faint lines around her eyes he didn't recognize, telltale signs of laughter and perhaps worry, a certain weariness in her posture, a subtle slump of the shoulders, but the irreducible essence of her, the determined set of her jaw, the fierce intensity in her dark eyes, the graceful curve of her neck. It was unmistakably, achingly, Elena. She wore faded jeans, comfortable-looking, well-worn boots, and a simple knitted blue sweater that probably cost less than the valet tip he'd given earlier that day. Seeing her there, so utterly unexpectedly, felt like stepping on a live wire, a shockwave through his carefully constructed reality. A sudden, overwhelming cascade of memories. Laughter under star-dusted skies, fierce, passionate arguments in their cramped shared apartment, the cold, clinical finality of their last conversation, slammed into him, leaving him breathless, disoriented. Regret, sharp, visceral, and sudden, twisted in his gut like a physical blow. He had orchestrated their ending with surgical precision, convinced his path to the top required solitude, a shedding of emotional ties. Seeing her now, vibrant, real, and undeniably present, the architect of that decision felt like an utter fool, blinded by his own ambition. He was caught between the powerful instinct to retreat, to vanish back into the curated safety of his isolated world, and an irresistible, magnetic pull to close the distance, to bridge the 5-year chasm, to simply speak her name and confirm she was real. Before he could make a conscious decision, before the shock fully registered in his system, a small, clear voice shattered the charged moment. "Mommy? Is that the cheesy crackers? The yummy ones?" Damien's gaze involuntarily dropped, following the sound. Tucked securely into the child's seat of Elena's shopping cart, partially obscured by a bunch of vibrant green kale and a carton of milk, sat a little boy, maybe 3 years old. He had a wild mop of dark, curly hair so strikingly, impossibly like Damien's own younger pictures it sent a jolt, an electric current, through him, and huge, intelligent brown eyes that were currently fixed with laser focus on the cracker box in Elena's hand. He was beautiful, utterly, undeniably captivating. Elena turned, her expression softening, transforming, as she looked down at the child. A radiant smile bloomed on her face, erasing the subtle weariness he'd noticed, illuminating her features with a warmth Damien hadn't seen in half a decade, certainly not directed at him. It was the smile that had first disarmed him, the one that promised sunshine, fierce loyalty, and a world outside of spreadsheets and board meetings. "Yes, sweetie, these are the yummy ones," she said, her voice gentle, loving, imbued with the uncomplicated affection of motherhood. "Good remembering, Leo." Leo. The boy's name was Leo. He beamed at his mother's praise, a pure, unadulterated expression of joy. Then his curious gaze swept the aisle, inevitably landing on the tall, motionless stranger standing nearby, the one who felt so out of place. Damien, still reeling from the shock of seeing Elena, managed a faint, automatic half-smile, a reflex born of social conditioning. Children weren't his forte. Their unpredictable chaos and unfiltered honesty were unnerving counterpoints to his meticulously controlled existence. But this child, those eyes, those impossibly familiar eyes. And then the impossible happened. Recognition, clear and undeniable, dawned on Leo's small face. Not just noticing a stranger in an unusual place, but recognizing him. He pointed a determined, chubby finger straight at Damien, his voice ringing out with startling clarity, absolute conviction, and an unexpected volume in the suddenly silent aisle. "Daddy!" The word hung in the air, electric, terrifying, a bomb dropped into the artificial calm of the supermarket. "Daddy!" Directed at him. Damien felt the solid floor tilt beneath his feet, a sudden wave of dizziness washing over him, the blood rushing from his head, leaving a cold, hollow roar in his ears. He stared at the child, then snapped his gaze to Elena. Her face was utterly devoid of color, bleached of all pigment, her eyes wide pools of sheer, unadulterated panic, a mirror of his own internal turmoil. The cracker box, forgotten in her shock, tumbled from her nerveless fingers, scattering its cheesy contents across the pristine floor like absurd, mocking confetti, each cracker a small, edible accusation. "Leo." "Shush." "No." Elena gasped, her voice thin and reedy, a strained whisper. She fumbled frantically with the cart's safety buckle, her movements jerky, uncoordinated, a desperate attempt to escape. That's not Daddy, honey. We don't point at people. It's not polite." She studiously avoided Damien's eyes, her focus entirely on extricating the child, on fleeing the scene before the impossible could become undeniable reality. But Leo, sensing the sudden, sharp shift in atmosphere, the palpable tension between the adults, frowned, confused. He squirmed in her grasp as she lifted him out, his gaze still locked directly on Damien, his small brow furrowed with worry and a lingering question. "Daddy," he repeated, quieter this time, more questioning, but still with that baffling, gut-wrenching certainty that pierced through Damien's shock. The pieces began to click into place in Damien's mind with sickening speed, a horrifyingly clear picture forming from scattered fragments. 5 years since the brutal breakup. The boy was about 3. The dark, unruly curly hair. Those impossibly familiar eyes. A cold dread, a creeping, icy tendril, mixed with a wild, impossible surge of something that might have been hope, seized him, a conflicting torrent of emotion. He took an involuntary step forward, drawn by an invisible force, his own voice sounding foreign, raspy, strained. Elena. She finally met his gaze, and the raw terror swirling, there was his answer, more eloquent than any words. It wasn't just awkwardness or surprise. It was the profound, bone-deep fear of exposure, of a carefully guarded secret being ripped open. Damien, she breathed, clutching Leo fiercely to her chest like a human shield, a desperate, protective gesture. Her eyes darted around, noticing the few shoppers whose attention had been snagged by the dropped crackers and the palpable tension radiating from their small group. We have to go. We were just leaving. She tried to maneuver the cart past him, a desperate, hurried bid for escape, for a return to the quiet anonymity she had built. But Damien, his mind now racing, processing the cataclysmic implications of Leo's single word, moved instinctively, blocking her path. It wasn't aggressive, but it was firm, an immovable object meeting a panicked, yielding force. "Wait," he commanded, his voice regaining a fraction of its customary authority, though his insides felt like churning liquid nitrogen, a frozen core of shock and disbelief. "Elena, we need to talk. Now. Not in 5 minutes. Not tomorrow. Now." "There's nothing to discuss," she shot back, her fear momentarily eclipsed by a flash of fierce, defensive anger he remembered well from their turbulent past, the spark that had first drawn him to her. She tightened her grip on Leo, who was now looking back and forth between them, his small brow furrowed with worry, sensing the storm raging between the adults. "He called me Daddy," Damien stated baldly, the words dropping like heavy stones into the sudden, cavernous quiet of the aisle, irrefutable and undeniable. He lowered his gaze to the boy, whose eyes, so startlingly, undeniably familiar, held his with a direct, innocent gaze. The resemblance was more than mere suggestion or fleeting similarity. It was a physical blow, a punch to the gut. The set of the jaw, the intensity in the gaze, the dark, unruly curls. A miniature reflection he never knew existed, a ghost of himself made flesh. "Why, Elena? Tell me why your son, who has never met me, would call me, a complete stranger, Daddy." Elena's carefully constructed facade finally cracked, splintered under the weight of his direct gaze and the impossible question. Tears welled, shimmering with a complex mixture of terror, old, buried anger, and the crushing, exhausting burden of her long-held secret. "He sees pictures," she stammered, her gaze skittering away, focusing desperately on the spilled crackers, the harsh overhead lights, anywhere but Damien's accusing face. "Old photos. I kept a few. I didn't realize he'd connect them. I never thought." Her voice trailed off into a choked sob, the sound tearing at something deep inside Damien. Pictures. She kept pictures of him, showed them to her son. His son? The word thundered silently in his chest, demanding confirmation, an answer to the impossible question. "Pictures," Damien echoed, the word thick with 100 unspoken questions, accusations, and dawning realizations. Why keep them? Why show them to a child? Was it a subconscious hope? A way to give the boy an identity, a connection to a missing piece? And the monumental question underpinning it all, the one that overshadowed everything else. Is he mine? "Damien, please," she pleaded, her voice dropping to a desperate, barely audible whisper. "Not like this. Not here. Not with people watching." She clutched Leo tighter, shielding him with her body, a fierce, protective maternal instinct overriding everything else. He saw her desperation, her fierce need to protect her child from the chaos his presence had unleashed. A part of him, the part that still remembered loving her, the part that ached at the sight of her distress, wanted to grant her the escape she so clearly craved. But the overwhelming, undeniable need for truth, the earth-shattering, impossible possibility that this child, this vibrant little boy, was his flesh and blood, was too powerful to ignore, too compelling to deny. Yet, causing a scene here, in the middle of a busy grocery store, terrifying the boy further. He took a deep, shuddering, steadying breath, forcing down the maelstrom of emotions inside, the panic and the burgeoning hope. "Okay," he agreed, his voice low, intense, and laced with a new, unwavering resolve. "Not here. But this conversation isn't over, Elena. Not by a long shot. It's barely begun." He reached into his pocket, retrieving the slim, obsidian card holder that contained his life in miniature. He extracted a single black card, his name, his private number, nothing else, a symbol of his inaccessible world, and pressed it into her trembling hand. Her skin was cold against his fingers, her fingers instantly closing around the card as if it burned her. The brief, electric contact sent an unwelcome, unbidden jolt of remembered intimacy through him, a ghost of a touch. "Call me tonight," he instructed, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. "If you don't," he added, his voice dropping further, devoid of heat but laden with an unwavering, quiet resolve, a simple statement of fact, "I will find you, Elena. And we both know I can. There is nowhere you can hide." It wasn't a threat meant to frighten, but a simple, undeniable statement of capability, of the vast resources at his disposal. In his world, information was a currency he possessed in abundance, and finding a graphic designer living a quiet life would be trivially easy, a simple database search. Elena knew this. Her knuckles turned white as she gripped the card, her hand trembling visibly. Without another word, eyes still brimming with unshed tears and the raw fear of what was to come, she pushed the now awkwardly balanced cart past him, her steps quick, almost stumbling in her haste to escape. Leo, nestled against her shoulder, looked back, his small face a mask of confusion and nascent worry, his eyes locked on Damien until they disappeared around the end of the aisle, swallowed by the anonymity of the store. Damien remained frozen, a statue in the middle of the bustling aisle, the chaotic energy of the grocery store fading into insignificance around him. The bright packaging of cereals and snacks seemed garish, the cheerful background music tinny and offensive to his ears. The Girard deli chocolate, the initial, mundane reason for this entire detour into the land of the normal, was utterly forgotten, a trivial detail in the face of the seismic shift that had just occurred. The gnawing emptiness he'd felt earlier had been utterly obliterated, replaced by a dizzying, terrifying, exhilarating storm of possibility. A son. He might have a son. A living, breathing child with Elena's resilience, her spirit, and impossibly, unbelievably, his own eyes. The carefully constructed fortress around Damien Sterling's heart, built over years of calculated ambition, emotional austerity, and a fierce, self-imposed solitude, hadn't just been breached, it had been utterly leveled, reduced to rubble by the single, innocent word of a child. As the initial shock began to ebb, supplanted by a cold, fierce, unwavering determination, Damien knew with absolute certainty that his world had irrevocably tilted on its axis. The truth. He needed the truth, and he would tear down heaven and earth, deploy every resource at his command, burn every bridge necessary to get it. The game had changed. The stakes were no longer billions or market shares or corporate dominance. They were flesh and blood, a connection that transcended wealth and power. They were everything. The penthouse, usually a sanctuary of controlled silence, predictable luxury, and absolute privacy, felt like a gilded cage that evening, stifling and unfamiliar. Damien paced the vast expanse of the living room, the city lights glittering indifferently outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, a distant, unfeeling audience to his turmoil. The untouched plate of expertly prepared sea bass grew cold on the dining table, a symbol of his complete loss of appetite for anything but the truth. The blinking light indicating urgent messages and demands on his console when ignored. The affairs of Sterling Corp suddenly feeling utterly insignificant. His entire consciousness was laser-focused, fixated on the sleek, black smartphone lying dormant on the polished Buffy desk, a silent, waiting oracle. Every phantom vibration, every distant siren wailing in the city below, made his heart leap, a jolt of nervous energy. He replayed the grocery store scene 1,000 times, dissecting Elena's every reaction with the analytical precision he usually applied to financial reports. The initial shock, the panicked denial, the desperate plea for privacy, the raw terror in her eyes when she finally admitted Leo had seen pictures. Pictures. Why keep them unless there is something, someone, to connect them to? Why show them to a child unless you wanted him, consciously or subconsciously, to know the face of his father? The timeline gnawed at him, a relentless, sharp ache in his mind. They broke up 5 years ago, a brutal, ugly severing he had initiated with cold, calculated intent. Leo was 3. The math was stark, unavoidable, a simple equation with a devastating answer. Unless Elena had moved on instantly, found someone new within weeks, conceived with another man immediately after their tumultuous split, it seemed improbable, almost impossible, given the depth of their connection and the raw pain of their breakup. Elena wasn't impulsive like that, not about things that mattered, not about building a family. He wrestled with the staggering implications. A son, his son. The words felt alien, momentous, heavy with unforeseen consequences. What did it mean? For his life? For the empire he'd bled for, sacrificed for, built at such a cost? He remembered the precise moment he'd ended things with Elena with chilling clarity. Sitting in their favorite Italian restaurant, the checkered tablecloth blurring under his gaze, the scent of garlic and basil thick in the air, he delivered the lines he'd rehearsed, cold, clinical, final, designed to inflict minimal damage while achieving maximum separation. My focus is absolute, Elena. Sterling Corp demands everything. There's no space, no room for distractions for this. For us. He'd ignored her tears, the heartbroken questions, her accusations that he was hiding behind his ambition, afraid of real intimacy, afraid of failing at something that truly mattered, something other than business. He'd walked away, telling himself it was necessary, pragmatic, even a twisted form of kindness, sparing her the inevitable neglect his all-consuming ambition would demand. He was building a legacy, a dynasty, and legacies didn't accommodate the messy, unpredictable, vulnerable nature of deep emotional connection. Or so he'd fiercely believed, clinging to that conviction like a life raft. Now, the memory burned like acid, a corrosive truth. Had she been pregnant then? Had he, in his blind arrogance, his single-minded pursuit of power, pushed away not just the woman he claimed to love, but his own unborn child? The guilt was a physical weight, heavy and suffocating, pressing down on his chest, making it difficult to breathe. He could activate his network. A few discreet calls, leveraging the vast resources, the almost limitless reach of Sterling Corp's Security and Information Division, and he'd know Elena's address, her work history, Leo's birth certificate details, every single verifiable fact within an hour. The temptation was immense, a familiar urge to seize control, to dominate the situation with overwhelming force and an avalanche of information. But her face, pale and terrified in the grocery store aisle, gave him pause. Her whispered plea, not here, not now, and the undeniable, devastating fact that, if Leo was his, she had carried this secret, this impossible burden, this extraordinary miracle, alone for 3 long years because of his actions, his rejection, his callous dismissal. He owed her the courtesy of waiting for a call. He owed her that much, at least a small gesture of respect for the magnitude of her secret and her strength. As the city outside transitioned from the fiery hues of sunset to the cool blues and deep purples of twilight, the phone finally buzzed on the desk. Not a notification from one of his countless apps, but an incoming call. Unknown number. His breath caught in his throat, his heart hammering against his ribs. He snatched it up before the second vibration. Sterling. His voice was tight, betraying none of the internal turmoil, the raging storm of emotion. A shaky breath on the other end, then Damien. Elena. Her voice was low, stripped bare of its earlier defiance, thick with exhaustion, vulnerability, and a fragile, hard-won resolve. Can we meet? Please? Somewhere quiet, private, where we can actually talk. A wave of relief, so potent it nearly buckled his knees, washed over him, a sudden release of tension. It was immediately followed by a surge of adrenaline, a readiness for the confrontation, the truth. Yes, of course. Just tell me where and when. There's a park near my apartment, she said, her voice flat, resigned, as if accepting the inevitable. Willows Creek Park. It's small, usually empty this time of night. There's an old fountain near the north entrance. Can you be there in an hour? Her tone was neutral, but the location itself spoke volumes. A modest neighborhood far from his usual orbits, residential, worlds away from the glittering towers downtown that defined his existence. I'll be there, he confirmed, his voice firm, unwavering. The line went dead, the sudden silence amplifying the frantic beat of his own heart, the echo of Leo's single word. An hour felt like an eternity, each minute stretching into an agonizing wait. He dismissed his driver several blocks away from the designated park, preferring the anonymity of the cool night air on his face and the purposeful stride on the pavement, a brief respite from the constant presence of security. The park was dimly lit, pockets of deep shadow clinging beneath the old, sprawling trees, their branches skeletal against the night sky. The air smelled of damp earth, freshly cut grass, and the faint, ubiquitous scent of the city, a distant hum of life. He found the fountain easily, a weathered stone structure, its basin dry and filled with rustling autumn leaves, a monument to a bygone era. He stood by its crumbling edge, hands shoved deep into his pockets, feeling exposed, vulnerable, and strangely uncertain, stripped of his usual armor of wealth, authority, and control. He saw her approach, a solitary figure moving through the shifting shadows, wrapped in a dark coat that looked inadequate against the increasing evening chill. She stopped several feet away, the space between them humming, vibrating, with 5 years of silence, unspoken words, and the monumental weight of the unasked, yet central, question. Damien, she began, her voice barely more than a whisper, a fragile sound lost almost instantly in the vast quiet of the park. He couldn't tolerate the suspense, the polite circling around the edges of the truth. He needed the answer, raw and immediate, a clean cut through the tension. Elena, his own voice was rough, lacking its usual polished, controlled tone. Just tell me, is Leo my son? She flinched as if struck, a physical reaction to the bluntness of his question. Her gaze dropped to the leaf-strewn basin of the fountain, her arms wrapping tightly around herself, a self-protective gesture. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken history, with fear, with the immense gravity of the moment, each second an eternity. Finally, she lifted her chin, though she still didn't meet his eyes, her gaze fixed on a point somewhere beyond his shoulder. Her voice, when it came, was choked, barely audible, a fragile thread of sound, yet it landed with the force of a physical blow, a punch to the gut that stole his breath. Yes, yes. The world tilted again, spinning on a new, unexpected axis. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, bracing himself against the impact of the single word. Yes, a son, his son. A maelstrom of emotions, disbelief dissolving into certainty, searing anger at the years of deception, profound, unexpected joy, and a crushing, suffocating wave of guilt crashed over him. A chaotic, overwhelming tide. He opened his eyes and truly looked at her, at the woman who had carried his child in secret, shielding him from the world, perhaps from Damien himself, from the man he had been. Why? The word was torn from his throat, ragged, aching, a raw wound. Why, Elena? 3 years. For 3 years, you knew, and you never told me? Why keep my own son a secret from me? How could you? Her head snapped up then, the pain in her eyes momentarily eclipsed by a flare of righteous anger, the old fire, the spirit he remembered burning brightly. A bitter, humorless laugh escaped her lips, a sharp, brittle sound. Tell you, she echoed, her voice gaining strength, laced with the accumulated bitterness, the quiet resentment of years of silence and perceived abandonment. Seriously, Damien? Should I have told the man who explicitly informed me, with cold, clinical precision, that any semblance of a normal life was incompatible with his grand ambitions, his singular focus? The man who sat across from me in a restaurant, stirring his espresso, and calmly, without a trace of emotion, explained that his work was his only meaningful relationship. The man who strategically, surgically, removed me from his life because I represented an unacceptable variable, a risk to his carefully constructed plans. Each question was a perfectly aimed dart, striking deep into the heart of his past arrogance, his self-absorption, his brutal dismissal of her. He remembered that final conversation with chilling, painful clarity, the restaurant, the calculated cruelty of his words, the way he'd armored himself against her inevitable heartbreak, convinced of his own necessary, noble sacrifice for the sake of his future. He'd framed it, in his own mind, as pragmatism, even a twisted form of kindness, sparing her the inevitable neglect his ambition would demand, the loneliness of being second to his empire. Seeing the devastating consequence standing before him now, shrouded in the park's gloom, her face etched with the pain he had inflicted, his justifications crumbled into dust, revealing only the stark, ugly truth of his fear, his selfishness, his monumental mistake. You told me there was no room, Elena continued, her voice trembling now, not with fear, but with the raw force of her conviction, her quiet strength. No room for distractions, no room for love, no room for family. You made your choice crystal clear, Damien. You chose your empire over me. So when I found out I was pregnant, just weeks after you walked away, after I cried myself sick for days, mourning the loss of you, of us, yes, I was terrified. And I was utterly, completely alone. I thought about calling you, Damien, she whispered, the memory clearly painful. God, I agonized over it. I played out 100 scenarios in my head, each one ending in heartbreak or conflict. Would you accuse me of trapping you? Of trying to use a child to get back into your life? Would you demand a paternity test like some cold, clinical transaction, reducing our son to a biological sample? Would you try to control everything, use your lawyers and your immense wealth to dictate Leo's life before he even drew his first breath, suffocating him with your power? Or worse, the fear that truly paralyzed me? Would you simply not care? Would you see him as nothing more than an inconvenient consequence, a footnote to be managed or ignored, a problem to be solved and then forgotten? He flinched, a sharp, involuntary movement. Her fears, laid bare in the quiet night, were terrifyingly plausible. Knowing the man he was 5 years ago, cold, driven, emotionally walled off, convinced of his own invincibility, how would he have reacted? He couldn't be certain, and that agonizing uncertainty damned him more than any accusation. I couldn't risk it, she whispered, the anger draining away, leaving behind a profound, aching sadness, a deep well of sorrow. He deserved better, Damien. He deserved to be wanted, celebrated, cherished, not debated or litigated, not a pawn in some power struggle. He deserved a parent who chose him wholeheartedly, not one who might see him as a disruption to a carefully curated existence. So I made my own choice, to raise him myself, to build a life for us, a quiet life, maybe a life without the chaos of your world, but one filled with unconditional love. That was the one thing I knew, with absolute certainty I could give him. She finally met his eyes, hers glistening with unshed tears, a fragile vulnerability in their depths. The pictures, I kept them so he wouldn't feel rootless. So he know a part of him came from somewhere, from someone real, someone connected to him, even if that someone wasn't present in his life. I never, ever imagined he would see you, of all people, in a random grocery store and put it together. Never in a million years. He listened, absorbing the crushing weight of her words, the immense depth of her sacrifice, her quiet strength. She hadn't kept Leo secret out of spite, out of a desire for revenge, but out of protection. Protection from the man Damien had been, from the world he inhabited. The guilt was a physical sickness inside him, a corrosive acid eating away at his carefully constructed self-image. She had shouldered the entire burden, navigated pregnancy, childbirth, and single motherhood alone, shielding their son from the potential fallout of Damien's own making, his own abandonment. His respect for her, always substantial even after the bitter wreckage of their split, morphed into something akin to reverence, a deep and abiding admiration. "Elena," he began, his voice thick with emotion he rarely allowed himself to feel, let alone display to another living soul. I was wrong. So profoundly, devastatingly wrong. About everything. About us. About what mattered about myself. The admission felt like tearing down a fortress brick by brick, dismantling the walls he had spent a lifetime building. But it was necessary. It was the truth, the first step towards rebuilding. "Yes, you were," she agreed softly, no hint of triumph or vindication in her voice, only weariness, the quiet exhaustion of carrying a heavy burden for too long. "Let me fix it," he pleaded, taking a tentative step closer, desperate to bridge the chasm that separated them, a gulf of years and unspoken pain. "Let me be his father, Elena. Please. Not as some duty, not as a complication to be managed, not as a name on a birth certificate, but because he's my son, our son. I want to know him. I need to know him. I ache to know him." He searched her face in the dim light, hoping for a sign, a flicker of forgiveness, a hint of the woman who had loved him. "I know I forfeited the right to ask. I know I don't deserve your trust, or his. I know I have years of silence and absence to atone for, a lifetime of missed moments. But let me try. Please, let me earn my way back. Into his life. Into your lives." He paused, the next words barely a whisper, fraught with the terrifying fear of rejection, of the door closing forever. "And maybe if it's not too late, into yours." The question hung in the cool night air, fragile and heavy with history, with the weight of their shared past and uncertain future. Elena hugged herself tighter, her gaze distant, wrestling with years of fiercely guarded independence and the sudden, disruptive, overwhelming reappearance of the man who represented both her greatest love and her deepest heartbreak. "I don't know, Damien," she said finally, her voice barely audible, a fragile thread of sound. "It's not like flipping a switch, turning a page. This isn't just about us anymore, about our past, our feelings. This is about Leo, his stability, his happiness, his peace. Your world, it's a hurricane, Damien. The money, the media scrutiny, the relentless pressure that surrounds you. I worked so hard to give him a normal, peaceful life, a life without chaos. I won't let that be destroyed." "I understand," he said quickly, nodding, recognizing the absolute validity of her fears, the reality of the life he inhabited. "Completely. We do this entirely on your terms, Elena. At your pace. Leo's pace. No disruptions, no pressure, no sudden appearances. I swear it, Elena. On everything. I need a chance. A chance to show you both that I can be different. That I want to be. That I am different." He saw the conflict in her eyes, the warring emotions, wariness battling hope, fear wrestling with a lingering affection. "Just tell me about him," he urged, shifting focus, desperate to know the child who was suddenly, impossibly his son. "What's he like? What does he love? What makes him laugh until he hiccups? Tell me everything I've missed, Elena. Please, fill in the blanks. And so, beside the dry, forgotten fountain in the quiet city park, under the watchful, silent gaze of the old trees, Elena began to paint a portrait of their son. Hesitantly at first, her voice soft and cautious. Then, with growing warmth and a mother's fierce pride, she spoke of Leo's first word, "Mama," she smiled, followed quickly by a frequent, telling commentary on toddler life. His current obsession with anything with wheels, especially bright yellow diggers and noisy fire trucks, his fierce, unwavering love for scrambled eggs but absolute, unyielding disdain for broccoli, the tuneless, happy hum he made when concentrating intently on building elaborate Duplo towers that inevitably toppled over. Damien listened, utterly captivated, hanging on every anecdote, every small detail, painting a vivid picture of the vibrant, curious little boy who carried his DNA, his legacy. He learned about sleepless nights battling teething pain, the scraped knees from inevitable playground tumbles, the illogical terror of bathtub drains. The monsters lived there. The boundless, insatiable curiosity about why the sky was blue and where birds went to sleep at night. He asked questions, hungry for every scrap of information, his heart aching with a paradoxical mix of profound loss for the time he'd missed and a burgeoning, fierce, protective love for the child he was only just beginning to know, to understand. As Elena talked, sharing the quiet joys and relentless challenges of the past 3 years, the wall of ice that had stood between them for so long began to thaw, ever so slightly, a fragile crack appearing in the frozen surface. The shared narrative of their son became a fragile meeting point, a space where the raw anger and ingrained defensiveness could momentarily recede, replaced by a common purpose, a shared focus on the life they had unknowingly created together. They weren't revisiting their broken past, picking through the rubble. They were tentatively sketching the outline of a possible future, one centered entirely around Leo, his needs, his happiness. They talked for what felt like hours, the city lights forming a distant, glittering backdrop to their quiet, momentous conversation, the park settling into deep night silence around them. Finally, Elena shivered, pulling her coat tighter around her shoulders. "It's late, Damien. I should get back. My neighbor is listening on the baby monitor, a lifeline, but I don't want to push my luck." "Right." "Of course," Damien said, reluctant for the conversation to end, for the fragile connection to be broken. The vulnerability, the uncertainty returned. "Can I see him properly? Soon? Not just run into him in a grocery store?" The request felt enormous, presumptuous, risking everything on a single question. Elena chewed on her lower lip, her gaze searching his face in the dim light, perhaps looking for remnants of the ruthless tycoon, the man who had discarded her, or perhaps for confirmation of the sincerity she desperately wanted to believe in, the hope that he had truly changed. After a long, waited moment, she gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod, a small gesture that meant the world. "Okay, Damien, but we take this slow, incredibly slow, one step at a time, for Leo's sake. His well-being is the only thing that matters." "Slow," he promised, relief flooding him, a warmth spreading through his chest. "Whatever pace you set, Elena, I'm not going anywhere." He instinctively started to reach for her arm, a gesture of reassurance, of connection, of familiar comfort, but stopped himself, letting his hand fall back to his side. Old habits, old intimacies were no longer as right, not yet. "Thank you, Elena, for telling me, for giving me this chance, however small, for raising him so well. He's an amazing little boy." She held his gaze for a moment longer, a complex tapestry of emotions flickering in her eyes. Residual pain, deep-seated exhaustion, perhaps, just perhaps, a faint glimmer of hope, a hesitant willingness to see what the future might hold. "Get home safe, Damien," she murmured, her voice soft, then turned and walked away, her figure quickly swallowed by the park's deep shadows, leaving him alone once more by the silent, empty fountain. He stayed there long after she was gone, the single word, yes, echoing in the chambers of his heart, a constant, profound reverberation. He had a son, Leo, a 3-year-old boy who loved diggers and scrambled eggs, and whose remarkable mother had protected him with fierce, quiet strength. The knowledge didn't just change his life, it reshaped the entire landscape of his existence. Sterling Corp, the empire he'd sacrificed everything for, the pinnacle of his ambition, suddenly felt secondary, a distant, less important concern. The relentless accumulation of wealth, the pursuit of more power, seemed hollow, empty, compared to the potential richness of this unexpected, terrifying, miraculous connection. He had been given a second chance, one he hadn't earned, hadn't deserved, but desperately craved with every fiber of his being. A chance to be a father, a chance to perhaps mend the broken pieces of his past, to rewrite the narrative of his life, to build something real and lasting. As Damien Sterling finally turned and walked back towards the waiting car, towards the familiar, opulent trappings of his immense fortune, he felt an internal shift, profound, irreversible, a fundamental change at his core. The richest man in the city had just stumbled upon a treasure beyond measure, hidden in plain sight, revealed not by market analysis or corporate strategy, but by the innocent, unwavering utterance of a child in a grocery store. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with the ghosts of his past mistakes, the challenge of earning trust he had so carelessly squandered, and the complexities of merging two vastly different worlds. But it was a path he would walk, resolutely, patiently. For Leo, for Elena, for the man he hoped, desperately, he could finally become. The real work, the work that truly mattered, the work of building a life, a family, was just beginning. The ensuing weeks, then months, were an exercise in meticulous restraint, unwavering patience, and profound emotional relearning for Damien. Accustomed to commanding situations with absolute authority and expecting immediate, decisive results, he had to adapt, to submit, to Elena's cautious, deliberate tempo, dictated entirely by Leo's comfort and needs. He embraced the concept of slow, with the same intense focus and strategic thinking he usually applied to hostile takeovers, understanding instinctively that any misstep, any hint of his old domineering tendencies, could shatter the fragile truce they had established. Their first planned meeting outside of the grocery store, a carefully orchestrated encounter, was at the playground Elena had suggested, a cheerful, slightly worn space adjacent to Willow's Creek Park. Damien arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in carefully chosen casual wear, expensive, yes, the quality undeniable, but deliberately understated, blending in rather than standing out. He felt ridiculously, unexpectedly nervous, his palms sweating, a sensation usually reserved for multi-billion-dollar negotiations where the stakes were astronomical, not sandbox diplomacy. He saw Elena approach, holding Leo's hand tightly, her expression a mixture of apprehension and cautious hope. The boy skipped slightly beside her, chattering excitedly about the slide, blissfully oblivious to the undercurrents of adult anxiety swirling around him. When Elena spotted Damien leaning awkwardly against a park bench, a figure of stiff discomfort, she paused, visibly steeling herself, taking a deep breath before leading Leo over. "Leo Bug," she said, her voice deliberately light and cheerful as she knelt beside him, a reassuring presence. "Look who's here. Remember Damien? From the park fountain that one night? He came to play." Leo peered up at Damien, his large brown eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and a healthy dose of toddler suspicion, assessing the stranger his mother had introduced. The impulsive, undeniable daddy exclamation from the grocery store seemed forgotten, replaced by the natural shyness and cautious observation of a young child meeting someone relatively new. Damien crouched down slowly, keeping his movements calm, non-threatening, his voice gentle, soft, and pitched low. "Hi, Leo. It's really good to see you again. Your mom said this is your favorite playground." Leo gave a solemn nod, clutching Elena's leg, a small anchor of security. "Big slide," he offered quietly, pointing a small finger towards the towering structure. "Wow, it looks very big and very fast," Damien agreed seriously, meeting the boy's gaze with genuine interest. Are you brave enough to go down it all by yourself? A tiny smile flickered on Leo's face, a brief but precious moment of connection. "I'm brave." He looked to Elena for confirmation, who nodded encouragingly, a small, reassuring smile on her own face. "How about Damien gives you a super-duper push on the swing first?" Elena suggested, subtly guiding the interaction, creating an opening. Damien seized the opportunity gratefully, a chance to interact, to connect. "I give excellent pushes," he declared with mock bravado, injecting a little humor into his nervous demeanor. Leo considered this, then nodded again, a decisive little movement. The next hour was unlike anything Damien Sterling had ever experienced in his carefully structured life. Pushing Leo on the swing, listening to his infectious giggles as he soared higher and higher, his small face alight with joy, felt more rewarding, more fulfilling than closing any multi-billion-dollar deal or securing any hostile takeover. He helped navigate the intricate tunnels and climbing structure of the playground, offering quiet encouragement, a steadying hand when needed, marveling at the focused determination on his son's small face as he conquered each obstacle. He sat cross-legged in the sandbox, his expensive jeans gathering dust and sand, receiving solemn, detailed instructions from Leo on the proper technique for filling a bucket and constructing a sandcastle turret, his mind entirely present, engaged, in a way it rarely was during even the most critical board meetings. He learned that Leo made a specific low vroom-vroom sound for trucks, but a higher-pitched, excited meow for race cars speeding across the sand. He discovered Leo hated it with a passion when sand got inside his shoes, but loved the feeling of it running through his fingers like liquid gold. These small, mundane discoveries felt like uncovering priceless jewels, each one a facet of the son he was getting to know. Elena remained nearby throughout, a watchful, unobtrusive presence, observing their interactions with a quiet intensity. Damien could feel her gaze on him, assessing, analyzing, searching for any sign of the man he had been, any indication that he wasn't truly committed. He saw the internal conflict playing out on her face, the ingrained wariness battling the nascent hope that perhaps he had changed, that he could be trusted near her son's precious, fragile world. He focused entirely on Leo, keeping his interactions gentle, patient, allowing the boy to dictate the pace and nature of their connection, celebrating small, seemingly insignificant moments of shared laughter. A shared laugh when a sandcastle turret unexpectedly collapsed, Leo spontaneously offering him a sticky, half-eaten cracker as a sign of acceptance. A quiet moment when Leo leaned against his knee to point out a passing dog with excited chatter. These playground meetings became their ritual, their tentative bridge between two worlds. They expanded slowly, cautiously, to include walks by the river, visits to a child-friendly museum, where Damien, to his surprise, found himself genuinely fascinated by the dinosaur exhibit, mostly because Leo's excitement was so infectious, and eventually short, carefully chaperoned visits to Damien's starkly minimalist, art-filled penthouse, which Leo, with the blunt honesty of a child, promptly declared too quiet and severely lacking in sufficient space for imaginative truck driving adventures. Damien, amused and strangely pleased by the critique, immediately commissioned a discreet but well-equipped playroom to be installed in a spare wing, transforming a sterile space into a child's haven, filled with everything from Lego gigasets to an entire fleet of construction vehicles of all shapes and sizes. He learned the rhythm of Leo's life. The Tuesday morning music class Elena took him to, the predictable Thursday afternoon tantrums when he was overtired and overstimulated, the unwavering nightly ritual of 3 specific bedtime stories, read in a particular order. He learned Elena's rhythm too. The late nights she spent working on freelance graphic design projects after Leo was asleep, the fierce pride she took in her hard-won independence, the supportive network of mom friends she relied on, the quiet strength that allowed her to navigate the challenges of single parenthood with grace, determination, and resilience. His relationship with Elena evolved tentatively, cautiously. The raw anger and ingrained defensiveness began to soften, replaced by a functional, sometimes even warm, co-parenting dynamic. They discussed Leo's development, his fears, his triumphs, his quirks, with a shared focus that often transcended their complicated history, united by their love for their son. Damien made a conscious, sustained effort to prove he respected her autonomy, her decisions, her space. He offered financial support through established, transparent channels, ensuring it was clearly designated for Leo and managed by Elena, never using it as leverage or a tool for control. He learned to listen, truly listen, when she talked about her concerns, her worries, validating her feelings even when his instinct was to offer a quick, decisive, typically Damien Sterling solution. He apologized again, more than once, not just for the breakup, but for his blindness, his arrogance, the pain he had inflicted, the years of absence. He knew apologies alone were insufficient. Only consistent, changed behavior over time, a demonstrated commitment, could truly mend the deep breach between them. There were inevitable bumps, moments of regression, reminders of the vast differences in their worlds. One afternoon, frustrated by a minor logistical issue regarding a specialist appointment for Leo, Damien unthinkingly had his assistant call Elena's phone repeatedly, trying to resolve the inefficiency with typical corporate urgency. Elena's reaction was swift, sharp, and furious, accusing him, rightly, of falling back into old patterns, of trying to manage her life as if it were a business problem. Damien, horrified by his lapse, apologized profusely and backed off immediately, recognizing the validity of her fear and the depth of his own ingrained behavior. Another time, a paparazzi photographer, likely tipped off about Damien's unusual park visits, managed to snap a long-lens photo of him pushing Leo on the swing, a seemingly innocent moment captured and exploited. The photo, splashed across a gossip site hungry for any dirt on the city's richest man, sent Elena into a panic, confirming her worst fears about the invasive intrusion of Damien's world into their quiet life. Damien was incandescent with rage, deploying his considerable resources to identify the source of the leak and issuing fierce legal warnings to suppress further intrusion, reassuring Elena with ironclad promises to protect their privacy, to build a shield around their family. These incidents, though stressful and upsetting, became crucial learning moments, forcing Damien to confront the real-world implications of his vastly different life and reinforcing his commitment to shield Leo and Elena from its negative, intrusive aspects. Slowly, tentatively, shoots of trust began to emerge, fragile but persistent. Elena started occasionally sharing anecdotes about her day, asking his opinion on a design concept she was working on, allowing glimpses into her world beyond motherhood, beyond Leo. Damien found himself confiding in her, sharing frustrations about Sterling Corp, the pressures he faced, or expressing his anxieties about fatherhood in a way he wouldn't with anyone else. The ghosts of their past intimacy sometimes flickered between them, a shared glance that lingered a fraction too long, an easy, comfortable laugh over one of Leo's antics that echoed happier times, a moment of unexpected physical proximity that sparked a jolt of awareness, a reminder of what they had lost. But both were cautious, hesitant, wary of rushing into anything until the foundation of their co-parenting relationship felt absolutely solid, built on trust and mutual respect. Leo remained the priority, the sun around which their reconstructed orbits revolved, the constant, undeniable center of their world. Several months had passed since the fateful grocery store encounter that had irrevocably altered the course of their lives. It was a crisp autumn evening, the air carrying the scent of fallen leaves, and Damien had been invited over for dinner at Elena's apartment. A significant, momentous step, a sign of progress and growing trust. Leo, bathed and pajama-clad, was reading a picture book on the floor, providing a running commentary about a mischievous monkey and a very tall giraffe. Elena was plating spaghetti in the small kitchen, the space filled with the comforting aroma of garlic and tomatoes, a simple, domestic scene. Damien sat at the small dining table, watching them, a feeling of quiet contentment settling over him, so profound, so unfamiliar, it was almost disorienting. This simple domestic scene felt more valuable, more real, more meaningful than any boardroom victory or financial triumph he had ever achieved. "He asked me something funny today," Elena said, setting a plate heaped with spaghetti in front of him, the steam rising in the warm air. She sat down opposite him, pushing her own hair back from her face with a weary but happy gesture. "He wanted to know if, since you're his daddy, Damien, and I'm his mommy, does that mean you're my daddy too?" Damien choked back a laugh, genuinely amused. "What did you tell him?" "I explained that mommies and daddies are grown-ups who sometimes love each other and decide to make babies, but they don't become each other's parents." She smiled, a soft, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "He seems satisfied with that for now. But, Damien, he's starting to see you as a permanent fixture in his life. He expects you at the park on Saturdays now. He asks when Daddy Damien is coming over." She paused, her expression becoming serious, weighted with the implications. "We need to think about consistency, about what this looks like long-term. For him." He met her gaze, understanding the weight of her words, the importance of this conversation. "I want to be that, Elena, a permanent fixture, consistent, reliable, whatever that takes, whatever you need me to be for him." He hesitated, then added, taking a breath, "I know my world is different, complicated. It's not simple, but maybe there's a way to bridge it. Carefully? Could he ever spend a night at my place? We could make his room perfect, secure, a place just for him." Elena considered it, slowly twirling spaghetti onto her fork, the silence filled only by Leo's quiet commentary from the floor. "Maybe," she conceded, her tone thoughtful rather than dismissive, a flicker of possibility in her voice. It was progress, slow, steady progress. "Not yet. Not right now. But maybe soon. We need to keep talking, Damien, about boundaries, about expectations, about how we navigate this together and separately, about how we ensure he always feels safe and loved, secure, no matter which house he's sleeping in." She looked at him directly, her dark eyes searching his, looking for reassurance, for confirmation of his commitment. "You've surprised me, Damien. You've shown up. You've been patient. You've listened. You're trying, really trying." The quiet sincerity of her words, the simple acknowledgement of his efforts, was more validating than any accolade he'd ever received in his professional life. "I won't stop trying, Elena," he promised, his voice low and earnest, a vow spoken in the quiet warmth of her apartment. "Not with him. Not with us. Whatever us might eventually mean." A faint blush touched her cheeks, a subtle shift in her expression. She looked down at her plate, then back at him, a small, tentative smile gracing her lips, a mirror of his own burgeoning hope. "One step at a time, Damien. Remember? One step at a time," he agreed, a reciprocal smile warming his own face, a shared understanding passing between them. Later that evening, after reading Leo his 3 non-negotiable bedtime stories, a task Damien now cherished, the quiet moments of connection more valuable than gold, and after Leo was finally asleep, tucked securely into bed, Damien found himself reluctant to leave, to break the spell of domestic normalcy. He stood with Elena by her apartment door, the comfortable silence stretching between them, no longer awkward, but filled with unspoken possibilities. "Thank you for dinner," he said softly. "For everything. For tonight." "Thank you for being here," she replied, her voice equally quiet, a simple statement of acceptance. Impulsively, gently, he reached out and brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek, a light, tentative touch. His fingers lingered for a fraction of a second against her skin, a brief, electric connection. It wasn't a reclaiming, a demand, but a question asked without words, a silent inquiry into what might be possible. Elena didn't pull away. She met his gaze, and in her eyes, he saw not just the wary co-parent or the ghost of heartbreak past, but a flicker of the woman he'd fallen in love with years ago, a hint of shared history mingling with the hesitant, fragile possibility of a different future, a future for them. The air crackled softly between them, charged with unspoken emotion. He didn't push it. He simply held her gaze for another moment, a silent acknowledgement, then gave a small nod. "I'll see you Saturday." "Saturday," she confirmed, a soft promise in her voice, a thread connecting them to the future. As Damien Sterling walked out into the cool night air, leaving the warmth, the light, and the quiet promise of Elena's small apartment behind, he felt a profound sense of hope, fragile yet insistent, a quiet certainty growing within him. The path forward was still long, challenging, paved with the need for continued effort, unwavering patience, and the messy, difficult work of forgiveness and rebuilding. Integrating their vastly different worlds, healing old wounds that ran deep, and building a stable, loving environment for Leo, a true family, would be the most complex merger, the most significant project he had ever undertaken. But looking up at the vast expanse of the night sky, thinking of the small boy sleeping soundly, dreaming perhaps of diggers and dinosaurs and all the wonders of his young world, and the resilient, remarkable woman who was his mother, Damien knew with absolute certainty that this was the only deal that truly mattered. The richest man in the city was finally, truly, learning the real meaning of wealth, measured not in dollars, not in power, but in connection, in forgiveness, and in the extraordinary, unearned gift of a second chance. And he was determined, one slow, deliberate, heartfelt step at a time, to build a future worthy of it all. Thank you so very much for joining us for this extended story tonight. We truly hope you were drawn into Damien, Elena, and Leo's journey of discovery and healing. Crafting these narratives is a labor of love, and knowing you're listening makes it all worthwhile. If you enjoyed this story and would like to support the creation of more content like this, please consider subscribing to the channel. Every subscription helps us continue bringing new stories to life. We appreciate you tuning in, and we hope to share another captivating tale with you soon.